been a while, but here's another episode on the Correct Techno Horizons tutorials. Historically in the past, I've been going over oxygen centrifuge systems for nitrogen and oxygen production. And previous before, I was using that as a method of generating nitrogen for just using the compressors for compressed air cells, just have that all get centrifuged into oxygen and nitrogen. That there is a viable early game option. But as you start progressing through GTNH and all that, and you unlock more machines that is able to do more recipes that you originally can't do, you come to realize there's more efficient methods on doing things, or methods that will also yield more resources that you might need. I've stumbled across a method that pretty much yields more nitrogen as well as other resources on top of it. Eventually, through HV, you will be unlocking the vacuum freezer. The vacuum freezer is the very keystone to a better nitrogen oxygen centrifuge system. So the whole general breakdown is that you're gathering liquid air, not liquid air, but just regular air gas, kind of like the previous method of gathering air using compressors, but instead you're feeding all the air to the vacuum freezers to create liquid air. And that liquid air you can then redirect into a centrifuge to then get turned into not just oxygen and nitrogen, but also additional gases on top of that. This new setup that I've stumbled across will generate additionally argon gas and noble gases. And those noble gases can then be centrifuged down even further to produce carbon dioxide, helium, methane gas, and deuterium. So this setup actually yields a larger variety. Now, of course, I chose to, as always, to go big with my production. So, with me being an HV at my current playthrough, I went ahead and used the HV compressors as my choice of compressor on this matter. So, of course, this means that I'll be producing all these resources at 8 times the power consumption versus just going through LV. So I got 11 compressors here in HV tier, which is enough to slightly oversupply 4 vacuum freezers. These 4 vacuum freezers will keep this turbo centrifuge running all the time to continuously fill up the 30 tanks. And a trace amount of noble gases going into this turbo centrifuge will run occasionally. Like I've calculated that with the amount of noble gases it produces just by that one turbo centrifuge, that every 800, excuse me, that every 630.7 seconds, this turbo centrifuge will turn on to produce the trace amounts of other gases. So if you want lots of noble gases being made, you would have to have lots of nitrogen production here, which at HV point of the game with gases that you're hardly using isn't really worth it. This is enough to keep things being produced at a rapid rate. So, calculating, including energy loss, I'm using gold cables here since gold is practically cheap for me. So using gold cables, causing a 22 EU per tick loss. Everything in total at max energy demand will require 2,454 EUs per tick, and it may oscillate at a lowest low of you basically may have at most 892 EU per tick because remember these compressors barely oversupply the vacuum freezers, so one of them will always oscillate on and off periodically. And this centrifuge, which will consume 80 EUs per tick, won't be on all that often. So this system will be almost be running at peak demand all the time. All these compressors I can run off of one turbo gas turbine. I've decided to have like one turbine for each vacuum freezer, since one vacuum freezer almost consumes one full amp of HV power. Now, ideally, I can have one turbine power two centrifuges, but I only decided to go like one turbine per centrifuge in order to minimize energy loss and save me routing additional cables unnecessarily. An additional note to as well is that I'm doing a GT tank system that stringed together by a bunch of pumps. I'm going to call that a fluid pump stream or fluid pump train. So through primitive fluid pump train here, I'm basically having two GT tanks at the end output fluid air, all the air into the vacuum freezers. I'm using stainless steel all the way up to the first vacuum freezer because I'm going to need to have the extra fluid throughput that stainless steel has to offer in order for all these tanks to deplete as necessary to keep the vacuum freezer supplied. After the first one, the rest can be supplied through steel pipes. With this configuration, I was able to have all four vacuum freezers interact with two input buses and one output buses, two each sharing one of each input output buses. It is possible to have each multi-block share input output buses and act accordingly. Can't do that with MX hatches though. And I'm not sure about the energy hatches. I'll have to experiment around that for sure. Anyhow, off of that squirrel. So all the liquid air that's being outputted will then go into a GT tank. Because of the fact that single block machines can only handle fluids through fluid cells, the GT tank blocks here will be handling how the air flows in and out, how the fluids are able to get converted into cells to be processed down and then being released back out of fluids. Because of the fact that there are four fluids being converted into being going into four tanks, I'm able to have them go into all the different types of fluids go into one tank to be routed into quadruple pipes. Again, I'm choosing stainless steel for the first set of pipes to maximize throughput, so that way everything empties out fast as possible and doesn't cause any unwanted congestion. On top of that, I'm having each quadruple pipe here use a fluid filter cover specified for each unique gas going into a GT tank to either be routed elsewhere or be stored into a tank gauge. I choose tank gauges because they are able to handle a lot of fluid at once, and plus two, I like the aesthetics of these tanks. It gives a big grand industrial scale to the eyes. I do have I do have overflow valves on each GT tank, so that way no excessive amount of fluid won't stall out overall production. So everything is going in here except for noble gases, which of course I am filtering through the fluid filter so that way there's no unwanted contamination. Same as centrifuge setup as I'm doing with oxygen here, except this time I'm not having to use stainless steel pipes due to the fact that a very small amount of all the noble gases are being produced from this centrifuge. I'm willing to bet that I can get away with. Let me verify to see if I can get away with just using an LV system. Yes, an LV centrifuge system will break down the gases. So I can actually go slightly more energy efficient and go for an LV gas turbine centrifuge system here. Though the energy cost will be very negligible in the long run. So for about 2,454 EUs per tick max, I'm basically able, through the compressors, I'm able to produce 2,933.3 liters of air per second, each compressor producing 266.7 liters per second. Each of the vacuum freezers are able to produce 714.3 liters of liquid air per second, which keeps up with the centrifuge here. The centrifuge is able to produce 2,156.3 liters of nitrogen, 593 liters of oxygen per second, 53.9 liters of argon per second, and 53.9 liters of noble gases per second. Now, this centrifuge is able to process noble gases a lot faster than what's being supplied. Obviously, this can't be. That's not; those aren't viable numbers considering the fact that it's receiving way less throughput of noble gases at a time. Because considering the fact that the centrifuge only turns on every 630 seconds. So accounting for the 630.7 second interval, this centrifuge will produce an average of 33.3 liters of carbon dioxide per second. Yeah, per second. 14.3 liters of helium per second, 4.8 liters of helium of methane per second, excuse me, and then 1.6 liters of deuterium per second. So the amount of the noble gases is very small at a very grand scale of all this, but through a large amount of time you can accumulate these gases that you're not immediately using. Helium, I do believe, helium is for sure used for superconductors. I believe you'll be able to use that for HV conductors if you wanted to. Yes, I do also remember seeing recipes for helium that suggest that helium would be ideal for EBFs. Methane is ideal for like polytetrafluoroethylene. Don't know much about deuterium yet, haven't explored much with it. And carbon dioxide, the only use I'm finding with it now is to have an easy way of producing carbon. Through an electrolyzer, you can electrolyze the carbon into the carbon dioxide into carbon. Argon, that I think I've seen recipes that involves it. I can check real quick. Yes, it's for sure an EBF recipe for solarium. Ooh, silicon solar grade, so this is helpful. Durium. Yeah, it's for sure an EBF. Yeah, it's for sure a catalyst to speed up certain EBF recipes. Anyhow, y'all, I know this tutorial is a lot to put in. Not to mention that I've never before that. Well, actually, I have before. And I think I've done so before on other tutorials, but there's a lot of numbers and a lot of fluids to take account of. Not to mention that it confused me a little bit to have accurate numbers on that turbo centrifuge for this here for the noble gas processing. But this is a working design that will yield lots of resources over time for y'all. That I would recommend it to work with whenever y'all can afford such setups. Anyhow, if y'all have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm really willing to answer you if I can. Anyhow, y'all, I will see y'all in the next video of the GTNH series. Y'all take care.